You are not going anywhere. The words had not been spoken yet, but somehow Dr. Marcus Reed felt them coming. The flashing red and blue lights behind his SUV painted brief streaks across the windshield as he tightened his grip on the steering wheel and glanced at the dashboard clock. 6:32 in the evening. 38 minutes. That was all he had. 38 minutes before a 14-year-old girl named Emily Carter would be wheeled into an operating room at St. Matthew Medical Center. 38 minutes before one of the most difficult cardiac procedures of the year was scheduled to begin. Marcus inhaled slowly and guided his vehicle onto the shoulder of the road. Outside, the late summer sky was fading into deep shades of orange and blue. Traffic continued moving past him while his own world seemed to stop. His phone vibrated on the passenger seat. The hospital. Again. He answered immediately. "Marcus," said a tense voice on the other end. It was Dr. Susan Palmer, the surgical coordinator. "Where are you?" Marcus looked into the rearview mirror. A police cruiser had already come to a stop behind him, about 15 minutes away. There was a pause. He could hear activity in the background. Rolling carts. Distant voices. A hospital preparing for something important. "Emily is stable," Susan said. "But we cannot delay much longer." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. "I understand. The family keeps asking if you are here." Her voice softened. "They trust you." Marcus swallowed. "Tell them I am coming." He ended the call just as the patrol car door opened. A uniformed officer stepped out and began walking toward the SUV. Marcus checked the clock again. 37 minutes. He reached for his hospital identification badge hanging from the rearview mirror. Years earlier, moments like this would have frustrated him. Now they simply made him tired. He had spent nearly 2 decades saving lives. Long nights. Missed holidays. Thousands of surgeries. Yet there were still moments when people looked at him and saw everything except who he actually was. The officer approached the driver's side window. Young. White. Clean uniform. Serious expression. Marcus lowered the window before the officer could knock. Warm evening air drifted into the vehicle. "Good evening, officer," Marcus said calmly. "Is there a problem?" The officer studied him for a moment before answering. "License and registration." Marcus nodded and handed them over immediately. "Officer, I am a surgeon at St. Matthew Medical Center. I am on my way to an emergency procedure right now. If there is any way we can move quickly, I would appreciate it." The officer glanced at the hospital badge but showed no reaction. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Marcus shook his head. "No, sir. You were traveling 15 miles per hour over the posted speed limit." Marcus looked briefly toward the road ahead. 15 miles. 15 minutes. 36 minutes remaining. Every number suddenly felt important. "I understand," he replied. "And I apologize. I normally would not do that." The officer's expression hardened slightly. "Normally?" Marcus nodded. "A young patient is waiting for heart surgery." The officer looked at him silently. The flashing lights reflected across the side of the SUV. Cars continued passing in the distance. Somewhere ahead, a hospital operating room was being prepared. Somewhere ahead, a frightened family was watching the clock. And standing between them and hope was a conversation that had only just begun. The officer's eyes moved from Marcus to the hospital badge and back again, as if trying to decide which version of the man in front of him was real. The silence stretched for several seconds. Marcus could almost hear the clock ticking inside his head. 35 minutes. Somewhere across town, fluorescent lights glowed above a prepared operating room. Nurses checked equipment. Surgical instruments waited in perfect order. A young girl lay in a hospital bed trusting that help was on the way. "Step out of the vehicle, please," the officer finally said. Marcus blinked once. "Officer, with respect, I have already given you my identification. Step out of the vehicle." The words came sharper this time. Marcus slowly opened the door and stepped onto the shoulder of the road. The evening air felt warmer now. Traffic rushed past only a few feet away, each passing vehicle carrying people home for dinner, to family gatherings or to ordinary evenings. For Marcus, there was nothing ordinary about tonight. The officer walked around the SUV, studying it carefully. "You said you are a surgeon?" "Yes." "What kind?" "Cardiothoracic." The officer frowned slightly. Meaning? Marcus forced himself to remain patient. Heart surgery. The officer nodded without showing much interest. And you are telling me a hospital cannot function without you for a few extra minutes? Marcus looked toward the darkening horizon. Hospitals function every day without any one person. But this particular patient is waiting for a procedure that I am scheduled to perform. The officer folded his arms. Scheduled? Marcus heard the skepticism immediately. Yes. Sounds convenient. For the first time, a flicker of frustration passed across Marcus's face. Not anger. Exhaustion. The kind that comes from explaining yourself over and over again. Officer, I understand why you stopped me. I understand that you have a job to do. I respect that. But there is a 14-year-old girl waiting for surgery. The officer remained expressionless. Do you have proof? Marcus pointed toward the identification badge hanging inside the SUV. The hospital can verify everything. Anybody can get a badge. Marcus looked away briefly. 33 minutes. His phone vibrated again. The screen lit up with the hospital's number. The officer noticed immediately. Do not answer that yet. Marcus stared at the phone. The vibration stopped, then started again. Officer, that call may be important. It can wait. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Miles away in a private hospital room, Emily Carter sat propped against white pillows while her mother held her hand. The television mounted on the wall played quietly in the background, but nobody was watching it. Emily looked pale beneath the hospital lights. She smiled anyway. He is coming, right? She asked softly. Her mother forced a smile. Of course he is. Emily nodded. Good. Down the hall, Dr. Susan Palmer stepped away from a nursing station and lowered her phone in frustration after another unanswered attempt. Around her, the surgical team exchanged worried looks. Nobody said what they were thinking. They all knew the same thing. There was no easy replacement. Back on the roadside, the officer finally picked up Marcus's license and studied it again. Dr. Marcus Reed. He said the name slowly. Then he looked up. Stay right here. Marcus watched as the officer returned to his patrol car. The flashing lights continued washing red and blue across the pavement. 32 minutes remained. And for the first time all evening, Marcus felt a quiet fear growing beneath his calm exterior. Not for himself. For Emily. The minutes seemed to move faster once the waiting began. Marcus stood beside his SUV watching the patrol car while the evening sky darkened above the highway. The officer remained inside, speaking into a radio and occasionally glancing toward him through the windshield. Marcus checked the clock on his phone. 31 minutes. His jaw tightened. Every surgeon understood pressure. Pressure existed in every operating room. Pressure came with every difficult decision. But this felt different because he was completely powerless to solve the problem himself. His phone vibrated again. This time the screen displayed a different number. Emily's mother. Marcus stared at it for a moment. He had met her several times during consultations. He remembered the fear in her eyes and the determination she showed for her daughter. The call ended before he could answer. Seconds later a message appeared. Please tell me you are close. Emily keeps asking. Marcus lowered the phone slowly. Across town, Emily sat in her hospital bed looking through a window at the fading sunlight. A stuffed bear rested beside her. Her mother sat nearby pretending to read a magazine she had not turned a page of in 20 minutes. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and fresh linens. Machines hummed softly in the background. Emily looked toward the door every few seconds. He is still coming, right? She asked again. Her mother forced another smile. Yes. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. Emily noticed. Children often noticed more than adults realized. Back on the roadside, the patrol car door opened. The officer stepped out carrying a small notebook. Marcus immediately straightened. Officer. The man approached slowly. How long have you been a doctor? Marcus blinked. The question surprised him. 18 years. Where did you go to medical school? Johns Hopkins. The officer scribbled something into the notebook. And you expect me to believe you just happened to be on your way to perform emergency heart surgery? Marcus felt frustration rising again. I do not need you to believe me. I need you to verify it. The officer's expression hardened. You seem awfully confident. Marcus looked directly at him. Because I am telling the truth. For several seconds neither man spoke. Traffic continued flowing past them. Headlights stretched across the road like streams of white light. Somewhere in the distance a siren echoed briefly before disappearing into the evening. The officer looked down at the identification card again. People lie to police officers every day. Marcus nodded. I know. So why should I treat your story differently? Marcus exhaled slowly. Because this is not a story. The officer looked unconvinced. You know what I think? Marcus remained silent. I think you got caught speeding and now you are trying to avoid a ticket. The words landed heavily between them. Marcus glanced at the clock again. 29 minutes. 29. He closed his eyes for a brief second before opening them again. Officer, if all of this ends with a ticket, I will gladly accept it. If it ends with a fine, I will pay it. But every minute we spend standing here is a minute that a child cannot get back. For the first time the officer hesitated. Only slightly. But Marcus noticed it. Then the radio clipped to the officer's shoulder crackled with a voice. The officer listened carefully. His expression changed. Not softer. More serious. He turned toward Marcus. Do not move. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Because whatever was happening now was not bringing him closer to the hospital. It was taking him farther away. The officer walked back toward his patrol car without another word, leaving Marcus standing beside the SUV beneath the pulsing red and blue lights. 28 minutes. Marcus looked at the clock again, then toward the highway stretching into the distance. The hospital was still there. The operating room was still waiting. Emily was still waiting. Yet every passing minute felt like another door slowly closing. Inside the patrol car, the officer spoke into his radio while reading information from a screen mounted near the dashboard. Marcus could not hear the conversation, but he could see enough to know that whatever concern had existed before had not disappeared. If anything, it had grown. His phone vibrated again. This time it was Dr. Susan Palmer. Marcus answered immediately. Susan. Her relief was obvious. Marcus, finally. He glanced toward the patrol car. I have been trying. Where are you? Still on the roadside. Silence. Then a long exhale. The team is ready. The room is ready. Emily is ready. Marcus closed his eyes. How is she? Susan hesitated. Stable for now. Marcus knew what those words meant. Stable for now was not the same as safe. Tell her family I am doing everything I can. They keep asking for you. Marcus lowered his voice. I know. Before Susan could say anything else, the officer stepped back out of the patrol car and started walking toward him. Marcus immediately ended the call. The officer noticed. Who was that? The hospital. Of course. The skepticism returned. Marcus felt frustration tighten inside his chest. Officer, you can call them yourself. Maybe I will. Please do. The officer looked surprised by the response. For a brief moment he seemed unsure what to say. Then he glanced toward the SUV. You said this surgery is important. Marcus stared at him. A 14-year-old girl is waiting for a heart procedure. Important is not a strong enough word. The officer folded his arms. You keep bringing up the patient. Because she is the reason I am here. Or because it makes a good story. Marcus looked away before responding. The patience that had carried him through countless difficult situations was being tested. Do you have children, officer? The question caught him off guard. That is not relevant. Maybe not. Marcus nodded slowly. But if you did, and they were waiting for a surgeon, you would understand why every minute matters. The officer remained silent. Traffic continued moving behind them. Headlights flashed across the roadside. Somewhere farther ahead, an ambulance crossed an intersection, its distant emergency lights briefly visible against the darkening sky. At St. Matthew Medical Center, Emily sat quietly while a nurse adjusted a blanket around her shoulders. Her mother stood near the window pretending not to cry. Across the room, a clock mounted on the wall showed 6:45. Every person in the room noticed it. Nobody mentioned it. Emily looked toward her mother. Is Dr. Reed stuck in traffic? Her mother forced another smile. Something like that. Emily nodded. He will still come. It was not a question. It was faith. Back on the roadside, the officer's radio crackled again. This time the voice coming through sounded sharper and more urgent. The officer listened carefully. His expression changed almost immediately. He turned toward Marcus with narrowed eyes. Then he looked down at the hospital identification card once more. "Stay where you are," he said. "Additional units are on the way." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. 26 minutes remained. And suddenly the situation was becoming much worse. Marcus stared at the officer for several seconds after hearing the words "additional units are on the way." The highway suddenly felt much louder. Every passing vehicle seemed to carry away another piece of time he could never recover. 25 minutes. He looked at the clock again to make sure he had not imagined it. 25. The number sat in his mind like a weight. "Additional units?" he asked carefully. "Why?" The officer did not answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the information displayed on a screen inside the patrol car. "There are inconsistencies." Marcus felt disbelief rising inside him. "Inconsistencies? That is what I was told." Marcus glanced toward the hospital badge hanging inside the SUV. "Then call the hospital directly. We are handling this." The response came quickly. Too quickly. Marcus looked down at his hands. He had used those hands to repair damaged hearts. He had spent years earning trust one patient at a time. Tonight those same hands hung uselessly at his sides while a frightened girl waited. His phone vibrated again. This time it was not a call. It was a message from Susan Palmer. "Operating room ready. Family asking every 2 minutes. Please update." Marcus typed a short response. "Delayed. Trying to resolve." The message felt painfully inadequate. Across town, the atmosphere inside St. Matthew Medical Center had changed. Earlier there had been confidence, preparation, routine professionalism. Now uncertainty had begun creeping through the hallways. Nurses exchanged concerned glances. Technicians checked equipment that had already been checked. Dr. Susan Palmer stood near the operating room doors staring at her phone. A younger surgeon approached her quietly. "Any update?" Susan shook her head. "Not yet." The younger doctor hesitated. "Can somebody else take the case?" Susan looked toward the operating room. "Not this one." The answer was simple. Honest. Uncomfortable. In Emily's room, the television remained on but muted. The girl sat quietly beneath a light blanket. Her mother watched the hallway through the partially open door. Every footstep caught her attention. Every passing doctor made her hopeful for a second, then disappointed. Emily noticed. "Mom." "Yes." "You are worried." Her mother forced a smile. "Every parent worries." Emily smiled faintly. "Not like this." Back on the roadside, another patrol vehicle appeared in the distance. Its lights flashed against the darkening sky. Marcus watched it approach and felt his stomach tighten. The officer noticed him looking. "Just stay calm." Marcus almost laughed at the irony. Calm was the only reason this conversation had not completely fallen apart. The second patrol car pulled onto the shoulder behind the first. A new officer stepped out and approached. Older. Broader shoulders. Serious face. The first officer walked over and quietly explained something. Both men glanced toward Marcus several times during the conversation. He could not hear the words, only see the doubt. The second officer eventually approached. "Him. Dr. Reed." "Yes. You say you are on your way to surgery." Marcus nodded. "A 14-year-old girl is waiting." The older officer studied him carefully. Unlike the first officer, he seemed to be measuring more than just his answers. "And you are the lead surgeon?" "Yes." The older officer looked toward the hospital identification badge inside the vehicle, then toward Marcus again. For a brief moment, something changed in his expression. Not belief. Not yet. But uncertainty. The first crack in a wall that had seemed impossible to move. Marcus checked the clock once more. 23 minutes remained. And for the first time all evening, someone other than him appeared willing to ask whether they might be making a terrible mistake. The older officer did not walk away immediately. Instead, he remained standing beside Marcus, studying him with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle that no longer fit the original explanation. The flashing lights painted shifting colors across the roadside while traffic continued flowing through the evening. 22 minutes. Marcus checked the time again and felt the pressure settle deeper into his chest. He had spent years making life-and-death decisions under bright operating room lights, but this was different. In surgery, facts mattered. Evidence mattered. Time mattered. Here, none of those things seemed to be enough. The older officer finally turned toward the younger officer. Did dispatch verify the hospital information? The younger officer hesitated. Not completely. What does that mean? They are still checking. Marcus looked between them. Then call the hospital directly. The younger officer exhaled. We have procedures. And I have a patient. The words came out sharper than Marcus intended. Silence followed. He immediately regretted the tone, but not the truth behind it. Across town, Dr. Susan Palmer stood outside the operating room holding a tablet in one hand and a phone in the other. Nurses moved around her with growing urgency. The schedule that had looked so organized an hour earlier was beginning to unravel. A senior anesthesiologist approached her quietly. How much longer can we wait? Susan glanced toward the clock on the wall. Not long. He nodded grimly. Neither needed to say more. Down the hallway, Emily's mother sat beside her daughter's bed. The room felt smaller now. The air felt heavier. Emily noticed every glance toward the clock. She noticed every whispered conversation outside her door. Something is wrong, she said softly. Her mother squeezed her hand. The doctors are working on it. Emily looked toward the window where darkness had replaced the evening sunlight. Dr. Reed always comes when he says he will. The simple confidence in her voice made her mother's eyes sting. Back on the roadside, the older officer stepped away and pulled out his phone. Marcus watched carefully as the man made a call. Several minutes passed. The younger officer remained near the patrol car, occasionally looking toward Marcus, then away again. For the first time since the stop began, uncertainty seemed to have replaced confidence. Marcus checked the time. 20 minutes. The number hit him harder than any before it. 20 minutes was no longer a delay. It was a threat. His phone vibrated again. This time a photograph appeared in a text message from Susan. Emily was smiling weakly from her hospital bed, while holding up a small handmade card. Across the front she had written in colorful letters, "Thank you, Dr. Reed." Marcus stared at the image. The edges of the card were decorated with uneven hearts and stars. A child had made it while preparing for heart surgery. He looked away and swallowed hard. The older officer returned a moment later. His expression had changed. Not dramatically, just enough. "Dr. Reed," he said, "how long have you been at St. Matthew?" 11 years. "And this patient?" "I have been treating her for months." The officer nodded slowly. Then his radio crackled. A new voice came through. Older. Commanding. The tone immediately caught everyone's attention. The younger officer straightened. The older officer listened carefully for nearly 30 seconds without speaking. When the transmission ended, both officers exchanged a look. Marcus could not hear what had been said, but he saw the reaction. Something significant had just happened. The younger officer glanced toward him again, this time with far less certainty than before. And as the highway lights stretched endlessly into the night, Marcus realized the story they had believed about him was finally beginning to fall apart. The radio transmission lingered in Marcus's mind long after the static disappeared. He could not hear the words that had been spoken, but he could see the effect they had produced. The younger officer no longer looked certain. The older officer no longer looked convinced that the situation was under control. For the first time since the flashing lights appeared behind his SUV, doubt had entered the conversation. 19 minutes. Marcus checked the clock again and felt a cold weight settle in his chest. Every minute now carried consequences. Not theoretical consequences. Real ones. Human ones. The younger officer stepped away and returned to his patrol car. The older officer remained standing near Marcus. "You said you have been treating this patient for months." Marcus nodded. "Since her diagnosis. And nobody else can perform the procedure?" Marcus looked toward the highway. There are other excellent surgeons. But not for this surgery. The officer studied him carefully. Why? Marcus hesitated. He disliked talking about himself. Most physicians did. The work was never supposed to be about ego. Because I helped develop the treatment plan, he said quietly. I know every detail of her condition. The officer remained silent. And because if I am being honest, her family trusted me with their daughter's life. The words hung between them. The older officer looked away first. Across town, inside a conference room overlooking the emergency department, hospital administrators had gathered around a speakerphone. Dr. Susan Palmer stood near the center of the room. Her patience was beginning to crack. Try dispatch again, one administrator said. We already have. Then try the department directly. Susan grabbed the phone without waiting for permission. On the fourth attempt, someone finally answered. This is St. Matthew Medical Center, she said immediately. We need confirmation regarding Dr. Marcus Reed. The voice on the other end sounded distracted. We are aware of the situation. Susan froze. Aware? Yes. Her expression darkened. Then someone needs to resolve it now. Back in Emily's hospital room, the atmosphere had grown noticeably quieter. The cheerful distractions were gone. Even the television had been turned off. Emily sat with her blanket pulled close while her mother stared out the window. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, Emily broke the silence. Mom. Yes. If Dr. Reed is late, will they still help me? The question struck like a blade. Her mother's eyes filled immediately. She moved closer and wrapped an arm around her daughter. They are doing everything they can. Emily nodded slowly. That was not my question. Her mother looked away because she could not answer. On the roadside, the older officer's phone suddenly rang. He glanced at the screen and immediately answered. Marcus could hear only fragments. Yes, Chief. A pause. That is correct. Another pause. The officer's posture straightened. No, sir. Not yet. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Chief. Someone higher up was finally involved. The conversation continued for nearly a minute. The officer spoke less and listened more. When the call ended, he stood motionless for several seconds. Then he looked toward Marcus. Dr. Reed. Yes. The chief wants a full report. Marcus almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because there was barely any time left. 18 minutes. Then I hope he gets one quickly. The older officer nodded slowly. Surprisingly, there was no irritation in his expression. Only concern. Real concern. He looked toward the younger officer standing beside the patrol car. Then back at Marcus. Something about this situation is not adding up. Marcus met his eyes. I have been saying that for almost an hour. The older officer did not argue. Because deep down, he was beginning to realize something that would soon become impossible for everyone to ignore. The wrong person might have been stopped. And the cost of that mistake was growing with every passing second. The realization had begun quietly, almost invisibly, but now it was spreading. Marcus could see it in the older officer's eyes. He could see it in the way the younger officer no longer spoke with the same confidence. Doubt had entered the scene, and once doubt arrived, certainty became much harder to maintain. 17 minutes. Marcus checked the time again and felt his heartbeat quicken. The number seemed impossible. An hour earlier he had been focused on preparing for surgery. Now he was standing beside a highway watching precious minutes disappear while a patient waited. The older officer walked a short distance away and called someone again. This time his voice was lower, more serious. Marcus could not hear much, but he caught a few words. Hospital. Surgeon. Verification. The conversation lasted less than a minute. When it ended, the officer looked troubled. Back at St. Matthew Medical Center, Dr. Susan Palmer was no longer hiding her frustration. She moved quickly through the surgical wing, phone pressed against her ear. I do not care who I need to speak with, she said. Find someone who can authorize a direct conversation with command. A nurse approached her moments later. Emily's mother is asking for an update. Susan closed her eyes briefly. Tell her we are still working on it. The nurse hesitated. She is scared. Susan looked toward the operating room doors. So am I. In Emily's room, the atmosphere had become painfully quiet. The girl sat with the handmade card still resting beside her bed. The bright colors looked strangely out of place against the white hospital sheets. Her mother stared at the clock on the wall. 6:53. Every minute seemed louder than the last. Emily finally spoke. Do you think something happened to him? Her mother's eyes widened. No, the answer came too fast. Too emotional. Emily lowered her gaze. Then why is everybody acting like something is wrong? Her mother opened her mouth but could not find the words. Because the truth was she did not know. She only knew that the surgeon they trusted was not there. Back on the roadside, the younger officer approached Marcus again. For the first time there was no challenge in his expression. No suspicion. Just uncertainty. How long have you known this patient? Marcus looked at him. Several months. You seem to care about her. Marcus almost smiled. That tends to happen when you spend months helping someone prepare for surgery. The younger officer looked away. I guess I never thought about it that way. Marcus remained silent. The officer shifted uncomfortably. Most people I stop are trying to get somewhere important. And usually it is not actually important. Marcus nodded slowly. Tonight it is. The officer did not argue. Before either man could continue, another radio transmission broke through the evening air. This one immediately changed everything. The older officer listened carefully, then looked toward Marcus. His eyes widened slightly. The younger officer noticed the reaction. What is it? The older officer did not answer right away. He stared at Marcus for several seconds. Then he looked back at the radio. Repeat that. The voice repeated something. This time the older officer's expression changed completely. The skepticism disappeared. The uncertainty vanished. In its place came something else. Concern. Real concern. He lowered the radio slowly. The hospital administrator just reached command directly. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. And the officer looked toward him. The chief is now personally involved. 17 minutes had become 16. The night air suddenly felt colder. The highway seemed quieter. Somewhere beyond the flashing lights and the endless traffic, decisions were finally being made by people with the authority to change everything. And for the first time all evening, Marcus sensed that the truth was finally moving faster than the misunderstanding that had trapped him here. The moment the chief became involved, the atmosphere shifted in ways Marcus could feel even before anyone spoke. The younger officer stopped pacing. The older officer checked his phone twice within a minute. The casual confidence that had defined the stop was gone. In its place was urgency. 15 minutes. Marcus stared at the number on his screen and felt his pulse quicken. 15 minutes before a frightened 14-year-old girl was supposed to be entering an operating room. 15 minutes before months of planning, consultations, scans, and preparation reached their most important moment. His phone vibrated again. Susan Palmer. Marcus answered immediately. Susan. The relief in her voice lasted only a second. Marcus, where are you? Still on the roadside. Silence. Then a slow exhale. The hospital administrator just contacted police command. I heard. Good. Her voice lowered. Because somebody finally realized who you are. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. He disliked conversations like that. This is not about me. I know. Susan paused. But it might be the only thing that gets you here in time. The call ended, leaving Marcus staring into the darkness beyond the shoulder of the highway. A few yards away, the older officer's phone rang again. This time he answered immediately. Yes, Chief Lawson. Marcus looked up. The conversation lasted less than a minute, but every second seemed significant. The officer listened far more than he spoke. Then he straightened. Understood. When the call ended, he turned toward the younger officer. The chief wants every detail. The younger officer looked uneasy. Every detail? Everything. Marcus watched the exchange carefully. For the first time, nobody seemed interested in questioning whether he was telling the truth. The question had become something else entirely. How had this happened? Across town, Chief Robert Lawson stood inside his office staring at documents spread across his desk. Earlier, He had received a routine report about a traffic stop involving a driver claiming to be on his way to perform surgery. At first he had accepted the explanation given by his officers. People invented stories every day. But then another call arrived. Then another. Then a direct call from St. Matthew Medical Center. Now a hospital administrator was speaking through the office speakerphone. "Chief Lawson," the administrator said carefully, "Dr. Marcus Reed is not simply a surgeon." Lawson frowned. "Go on." "He is the surgeon assigned to Emily Carter." Lawson looked at the clock. 7 o'clock. "And?" The administrator hesitated. "He is the only surgeon currently prepared to perform this specific procedure." The room went quiet. Lawson slowly lowered his pen. "You are saying this surgery cannot proceed without him?" "I am saying every minute matters." For several seconds the chief said nothing. Then he looked toward a framed community award hanging on the wall of his office. Public service. Duty. Responsibility. Words suddenly felt heavier than before. Back on the roadside, Marcus stood beneath the flashing lights while traffic streamed past. 14 minutes. The older officer approached him. His expression had completely changed. "Dr. Reed." "Yes." "The chief is reviewing everything personally." Marcus nodded once. "Good." The officer hesitated. "The hospital has been calling command repeatedly." "I would imagine they have." The officer looked down briefly. "There is something else." Marcus waited. The officer met his eyes. "The chief just learned exactly who you are." For the first time all evening, Marcus saw genuine concern on a law enforcement officer's face. Not concern about procedure. Not concern about paperwork. Concern about consequences. And somewhere miles away, inside an office filled with reports and ringing phones, Chief Lawson was beginning to understand that a decision made on the side of a highway might soon become the biggest mistake of his career. Chief Robert Lawson had spent nearly 3 decades in law enforcement. During that time he had learned to recognize the difference between a routine problem and a serious one. Sitting alone in his office, staring at the information now spread across his desk, he realized this situation had crossed that line a long time ago. The hospital administrator's words continued echoing in his mind. Every minute matters. Lawson picked up a file that had just been forwarded to him. Dr. Marcus Reed. The name meant nothing at first. Then he opened the attached records. Awards. Publications. Medical board recognitions. Community service honors. National speaking engagements. Lawson frowned as he continued reading. This was not simply a surgeon. This was one of the most respected cardiac specialists in the state. He reached another page and stopped completely. Lead surgeon for Emily Carter. Assigned. Physician. Procedure specialist. Lawson slowly leaned back in his chair. For the first time that evening he understood the full picture. Somewhere on the side of a highway, officers under his command were holding the one person specifically prepared to perform a critical surgery. He immediately picked up the phone. "Get me Officer Grant." Seconds later the line connected. "Sir." Lawson did not waste time. "Tell me exactly why Dr. Reed is still standing on that roadside." A long silence followed. The answer that finally came sounded far less confident than earlier reports. Back on the highway, Marcus checked the time again. 13 minutes. The number felt unreal. He could almost picture the operating room waiting for him. Stainless steel instruments. Bright surgical lights. Monitors glowing quietly. An entire team ready to begin. Everything prepared except the one person who needed to be there. The older officer approached him again. His posture was different now. Respectful. Careful. "Dr. Reed." Marcus looked up. "Yes. I owe you some honesty." Marcus waited. "The situation has changed." "I noticed." The officer nodded. "Command has verified your credentials." Marcus said nothing. "Everything." The officer emphasized the word. "The hospital. The surgery. The patient." Marcus felt neither satisfaction nor relief. Only urgency. "Then I need to leave." The officer looked away briefly. "I know." Several yards away, the younger officer stood beside the patrol car staring at the ground. The certainty that had fueled the stop had vanished. In its place sat an uncomfortable realization. He replayed the conversation in his mind. The hospital badge. The phone calls. The repeated explanations. Every warning Marcus had given. Every opportunity to verify the truth sooner. The weight of those decisions was becoming impossible to ignore. Across town, Emily lay quietly in her hospital bed while her mother sat beside her. The clock now read 7:03. The room felt suspended in time. Neither wanted to ask the question hanging between them. Finally Emily spoke. "Do you think Dr. Reed forgot?" Her mother immediately shook her head. No, this time the answer came with certainty. Then what happened? Her mother looked toward the dark hallway beyond the room. "I do not know." The honesty hurt more than either expected. Back at police headquarters, Lawson stood and walked toward the window overlooking the city. Lights stretched across the horizon. Somewhere out there was a frightened child waiting for surgery. Somewhere out there was a doctor who had been trying to reach her for nearly an hour. Lawson felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Not because of public relations. Not because of paperwork. Because he suddenly understood the human cost of the mistake. He picked up the phone again. This time his voice carried unmistakable urgency. "Listen carefully," he said. "Dr. Reed needs to be released immediately." On the roadside, Marcus's phone displayed 12 minutes remaining before the scheduled procedure. Then the older officer's radio crackled to life. The message that followed changed everything. The radio message lasted only a few seconds, but its impact was immediate. The older officer listened carefully, then closed his eyes for a brief moment as though absorbing the weight of what he had just heard. When he looked back at Marcus, the hesitation was gone. "Dr. Reed," he said quietly, "you are free to go." For a second Marcus did not move. The words felt strangely unreal after nearly an hour of delays, questions, and disbelief. Then instinct took over. He turned toward his SUV, already reaching for the door handle. "Wait," the older officer called out. Marcus stopped. "The chief has ordered an escort." Marcus looked back. "An escort?" The officer nodded. "You need to get to that hospital as fast as possible." 11 minutes remained. The younger officer stood frozen beside the patrol car. His face had lost all color. He opened his mouth as if trying to say something, but no words came. Marcus held his gaze for a moment. There was frustration inside him. There was disappointment. But there was no time for either. "Take care of yourself, officer," Marcus said simply before climbing into the SUV. The younger officer lowered his eyes. Within moments, the patrol vehicles pulled onto the highway ahead of Marcus. Their emergency. Lights flashed against the darkness, creating a corridor through evening traffic. Cars began moving aside. Lanes opened. For the first time all night, the road ahead was clear. At police headquarters, Chief Lawson remained standing by his office window. Another call from the hospital had just ended. The administrator's final words continued echoing in his mind. "We are running out of time." Lawson looked down at the reports on his desk and felt a growing sense of regret. Not because a mistake had been made. Mistakes happened. It was because the warning signs had been there from the beginning. The badge. The calls. The consistency of Marcus's story. The urgency. Too many people had chosen suspicion before verification. And now a child was paying the price for that delay. Across town, St. Matthew Medical Center had become a place of nervous anticipation. Nurses moved quickly through hallways. Surgical staff remained ready. Nobody wanted to leave the operating room. Nobody wanted to admit what they were thinking. Every eye seemed drawn toward clocks mounted on walls. 7 minutes. In Emily's room, her mother sat holding both of her daughter's hands. The young girl looked tired but calm. "He is coming," Emily whispered. Her mother smiled sadly. "How do you know?" Emily glanced toward the handmade card resting on her blanket. "Because he promised." The answer was simple. Certain. Faith often was. Back on the highway, Marcus gripped the steering wheel while the police escort guided him through traffic. 6 minutes. His phone buzzed. Susan Palmer. He answered immediately through the vehicle speaker system. "Marcus." Relief flooded her voice. "Where are you?" 5 minutes out. A cheer erupted somewhere in the background. Marcus heard laughter. Applause. The release of fear that had been building for over an hour. Susan's voice trembled slightly. "Emily's family is still waiting." Marcus looked ahead at the glowing city skyline. Tell them I am almost there. The escort accelerated through another intersection. Hospital lights appeared in the distance. Bright, familiar, hopeful. For the first time since the flashing lights had appeared behind him on the highway, Marcus allowed himself to believe he might still make it. And as the entrance to St. Matthew Medical Center came into view beneath the night sky, Chief Lawson received one final update through his radio. Dr. Reed was arriving. But the chief knew something else had arrived as well. The moment when everyone involved would finally have to face the consequences of what had happened. The emergency entrance doors slid open before Marcus had fully stepped out of the SUV. Nurses were already waiting. A surgical technician met him halfway down the corridor with a sterile bag in hand. The entire hospital seemed to exhale at once. The tension that had gripped the building for more than an hour did not disappear, but it finally had somewhere to go. Marcus moved quickly through the brightly lit hallway. His footsteps echoed against polished floors. Familiar faces appeared from doorways and nursing stations. Some smiled. Some simply nodded. Nobody wasted time with questions. There would be time for explanations later. Right now there was only one priority. For minutes. Marcus glanced at the clock mounted near the surgical wing entrance. 4 minutes remained before the procedure was scheduled to begin. As he approached Emily's room, the door opened. Her mother stood there with tired eyes and trembling hands. For a second neither spoke. Then tears filled her eyes. You came. Marcus smiled gently. I told you I would. Inside the room, Emily looked up from her bed and immediately brightened. The fear that had shadowed her face throughout the evening seemed to lift. Dr. Reed. Marcus stepped closer. Hey, Emily. She pointed toward the handmade card still resting beside her blanket. I knew you would make it. Marcus felt emotion tighten in his chest. Thank you for believing in me. Emily smiled. You always tell me not to give up. For a moment, everything else faded away. The flashing police lights. The delays. The frustration. The misunderstanding. There was only a doctor and a young patient sharing a brief moment of trust before a difficult procedure. Marcus checked her chart one final time. Reviewed the notes. Asked a few questions. Then he nodded. Ready. Emily took a deep breath. Ready. A few minutes later she was being wheeled toward the operating room, while her mother walked beside her holding one hand. Marcus followed closely. The surgical team moved with calm efficiency. Every person knew their role. Every step had purpose. The uncertainty of the evening slowly gave way to focus. Outside the operating room, Chief Lawson arrived quietly through a side entrance. He had driven directly from headquarters. No media. No announcements. No excuses. He stopped near the waiting area and looked around. Families sat beneath soft lights. Nurses crossed hallways carrying charts. A coffee machine hummed quietly in the corner. Felt strangely ordinary. Yet somewhere beyond those doors, a young girl's future depended on a surgeon who should have been there long ago. Lawson sat down alone. For the first time all evening, nobody needed anything from him. No reports. No decisions. No commands. There was only waiting. And reflection. Hours passed. The hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm. The waiting room grew quieter. Emily's mother sat with folded hands and closed eyes. Susan Palmer occasionally stepped out to provide brief updates. Progress was steady. The procedure was moving forward. Each update brought cautious relief. Finally, shortly after midnight, the operating room doors opened. Marcus emerged wearing surgical scrubs and a tired expression. Sweat still glistened near his forehead. The room immediately stood. Emily's mother searched his face before he even spoke. Marcus smiled. A genuine smile. She is going to be okay. The words broke something loose inside the room. Tears appeared instantly. Hands covered mouths. Quiet prayers became grateful ones. Emily's mother hugged him without hesitation. Marcus closed his eyes briefly and returned the embrace. Across the waiting area, Chief Lawson remained standing. He watched the scene unfold in silence. Watched a family receive hope. Watched a doctor accept gratitude without seeking recognition. And in that moment the weight of what had happened settled more heavily on his shoulders than ever before. Because the life being celebrated tonight was the very life that had nearly been. placed at greater risk by a mistake made under his command. The hospital felt different the following morning. Sunlight poured through tall windows, washing away the tension that had filled the building the night before. Nurses exchanged smiles in hallways. Families spoke in softer voices. Somewhere beyond the intensive care unit doors, a young girl was beginning a new chapter of her life. Marcus Reed stood near a window holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He had not slept. That was nothing unusual after a major surgery. What lingered was not exhaustion. It was reflection. He watched the city wake beneath a pale blue sky when footsteps approached from behind. Chief Robert Lawson stopped a few feet away. For several seconds neither man spoke. The silence felt honest. Lawson finally broke it. "Dr. Reed." Marcus turned. "Chief." Lawson looked older than he had the night before. Not physically. Emotionally. The kind of look people carried when they wished they could undo something but knew they never would. "I owe you an apology." Marcus listened quietly. Not because of public attention. Not because of reports. Not because of what this could mean for my department. Lawson paused. "I owe you an apology because I failed to make sure the truth mattered more than assumptions." The words hung in the air. There was no defensiveness behind them. No excuses. Only accountability. Marcus glanced through the glass toward the patient wing. "Emily is alive." Lawson nodded. "Because of you." Marcus looked back at him. "Because a lot of people worked very hard to help her." Lawson lowered his eyes briefly. "You could be angry." Marcus smiled faintly. "I was." The honesty surprised them both. But anger would not help Emily. The chief let out a slow breath. "I keep thinking about how many chances we had to verify who you were." Marcus remained silent. Lawson shook his head. "You told the truth from the beginning." "Yes." "And nobody listened." Marcus looked out the window again. Morning light reflected across the hospital parking lot. Doctors arrived for shifts. Families entered through the main doors carrying flowers and hope. Life continued moving forward. "The problem was never the traffic stop," Marcus said quietly. "The problem was deciding what kind of person I was before checking the facts." Lawson swallowed hard. Because deep down he knew Marcus was right. Several minutes later, a nurse approached with a smile. "Emily is awake." Marcus immediately set down his coffee. Together they walked toward her room. When the door opened, Emily looked tired but happy. Her mother sat beside the bed holding her hand. The handmade card was still there. Slightly bent now. Still colorful. Still hopeful. Emily grinned when she saw Marcus. "I told everybody you would make it." Marcus laughed softly. "You were right." Her mother wiped away tears. "Thank you will never be enough." Marcus shook his head gently. "Seeing her smile is enough." Standing near the doorway, Lawson watched the exchange in silence. No awards. No speeches. No recognition ceremony. Just a doctor checking on a patient. Just kindness where bitterness could have existed. Just grace where resentment would have been understandable. As the conversation continued, sunlight spilled across the hospital room floor. Emily smiled. Her mother smiled. Marcus smiled. And Chief Lawson quietly stepped back into the hallway. He understood something now that reports and policies could never teach. Respect begins with listening. Dignity begins with seeing people as they are, not as assumptions suggest. Through the room's window, the morning light continued to grow brighter. Emily's future stretched ahead of her. Marcus turned to answer another one of her questions. And somewhere in the quiet space between gratitude and redemption, everyone present understood that one person's humanity had changed far more than a single life.